We are talking about Cabinet of Curiosities.
8 episodes altogether, handled by a few different cinematographers. I was lucky enough to do 3 of them. And why don't we start off just talking about Pickman's model, which was the first one I did.
I have always tried to look for the beauty in everything. But around this man and his work, the darkness has a way of catching me.
Do you feel it, Will? The fear?
We used different camera systems on the series. I ended up using Sony Venice for my 3 episodes.
What's this episode about, the synopsis-wise?
It's a story about a young artist who, in art school, runs into another student, an odd chap, and their destinies end up being linked together for the rest of their lives. There's something about Pickman that is interesting and yet very concerning. And we follow the journey of our character through 3 or 4 separate moments in his life, meeting him first in school, then seeing how his life changes through war, and in each situation all the way up until he has a family and we think he's on his path to success, he keeps running into this former student. All sorts of madness ensues.
Madness is right, because he goes through what he appears to have, this madness every time he sees a painting. It starts to move.
There's something in the art that has a sinister effect. And that's one of the things that we had to try and convey, was what is it about these pieces of art that have this, this strange, sinister effect on the characters.
Well, I remember we started our conversation early on in the prep about, what's the look going to be and look development. And we decided on a film print emulation LUT to start, because doing these period pieces is really great, because you get to actually do, we didn't need to play it straight or be normal. There was room to do looks, which is always exciting for a colorist to be able to play, I suppose. It seemed intuitive to go film, let's make it as interesting as possible with this film look. These particular print LUTs were made a very long time ago, because back when we did DIs, we would have to have projector LUTs to emulate what was going to happen when we go back to film and then go back to print.
Exactly.
And also incorporate our lab aims and everything else. So it's a bit of a vintage workflow, but it seemed one of the best ways for us to really visualize the look for this.
Taking that LUT onto set, working with the camera and that color space. I try and do as much as possible in camera. Working with the production designer and the lighting team to try again capture the colors and work with get you an image that's as close as possible to what we really want to go for. And doing live grade on set was, really handy, because again, we could see where we were, we could modify things a little bit, and that information would get passed on to you later on.
I always like the workflow where we can make a LUT and everyone you're tweaking on set, but and then for the most part, people get used to the look, and not that it's baked in or anything, but there's no surprises later about what people are going to see. On these types of shows with this kind of production value, the set design, the wardrobe, the art direction, everything is already very top notch. So when it comes to us, we get to spend our time enhancing it instead of, fixing things where maybe production didn't have time for something. We were always having to do things, whereas, it's pretty much really great, right off the truck, and we're just being able to do look, create more of the look on top of it again.
Like when we're working on the floor, we know that there's, especially when you have experience, like we have together, I know there are certain things that you and I can do later on that maybe we don't want to take the time to do on set. Things that'll allow us to get more work done during the day on set things that we can now handle later on. And when the thing is cut together, obviously, that way we can be a bit more cohesive about the approach.
And that's our job as a colorist anytime. Is the photography it's all very much there, but you never know how it's going to be cut together. So it's like, do we need to take down that floor, that ceiling, that wall, just to make it feel a little more seamless and deal with the frame that you're using and not just all that you shot, which is what you have to, protect
Exactly.
for all of it.
Do you want to have a little look at how we sort of handled this sequence here?
But this shot really spoke to me a bit about the tone of what this ended up being, which I really liked. There's plenty there in the negative. I'm going to dissect a little bit. So if we turn off some of what we got going on here, it's on the surface, we're bringing it down a bunch. But that's intentional because, as you were saying, we made the LUT to sit on it a bit so you could overexpose a bit, get a beefier negative.
And that's the thing too, is you don't want to starve the sensor necessarily. And I like being able to give as much as possible so we can pull out details in costume or in, different makeup effects, for instance.
Right, and that's all good practice. In terms of, the LUT's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but then we're adding, part of the recipe here is, we wanted to emphasize the split tone of the image, and I was taking the whites and just warming them up slightly, and I think we're not lifting it too much there. We're just doing it as a warmth thing, and we also have our skin separate, so in case we're cooling the shadows so much it starts to eat into the fall off of the skin tone, so we kind of change that. And we have this little secret layer, which I like this emphasizing the mid-tone detail that kind of offsets what's happening with the highlight change. And then on other simple things, we're vignetting this because we've got a big wall back there. We cut down that light on the side that's not the key side, and then I think we put a topper in there just to emphasize the frame.
And that's something that helps because, again, we're lighting a scene that needs to be seen from multiple angles, and we have to, be able to move quickly on the set. Sometimes, taking a wall down will cost us in terms of, we'll lose the light on the actor in another position. So being able to do that kind of work here lets us, get the best of both worlds in terms of, the speed of working on the day and, being able to sort of shade and bring in that nuance later. It's fantastic.
There's a lot of different tools in Resolve. We're using Resolve, by the way, that lets you really, tinker with depth and, everything really. The effects packages, which is something we'll get into later about what we're adding and taking away from all the stuff like that. So, Colin, I think this is a really good example of some of the mixed lighting you guys were using. What do you tell me about that?
Yeah, here we had a color of moonlight that we sort of worked on for this episode, which involved adding a little bit of green to blue. We also had to find a way to do that with LED and with HMI light, so in different circumstances we could get that same color. What was really cool about this set was Shane, our set decorator, found these fantastic orange bulbs, and we worked with those orange bulbs and we mimicked that color with our key light, and so to try and find this kind of nice color contrast, which looks a little otherworldly and a little different, and brings us into the strange world of Pickman here.
Now, this is an HDR finished show. We're, for the purposes of what we're recording here, it's SDR, but the challenges of highlight detail on an HDR show when you're not seeing it.
It's the thing, because we're not monitoring HDR on set yet.
Mm-hmm.
We're watching it on the scopes, and Jasper's
your DIT.
Jasper, our DIT, Jasper Vracking, he's always keeping an eye out to make sure that we're not blowing anything out too far, taking something so far that we're never going to be able to recover it. I mean, HDR monitors now have the power to, almost blind you. They're so bright, potentially. So you do have to be careful about how bright a highlight you put into a given shot, as it can actually make your eyes squint when you're watching an HDR monitor with a 1000 nit brightness. We
have these monitors that go that bright, you know, but when it comes to highlights, you know, when we're making the HDR versions of these, that's what we're talking about all the time. It's easier on the eyes. Like we talk about, you know, if we let that go, that's the negative, right?
Yeah.
And on a monitor that can show you that bright, well, your eyes are stopping down to f64 and all of a sudden you can't see the action in the shot. So, and sometimes we're doing it the opposite. Like, I think we had some times where it was like, okay, there's not enough punch coming out that window, let's bring it up, you know, but you always have the ability to be able to just hang on to, you know, a light and do whatever we want to it, you know, whether it's temperature, you know, or, you know, this is going to change the mood drastically about time of day or, you know, or however much you want that to punch you in the face with that light. And this was a scene that has some LED lanterns.
These lanterns were actually electronic and used to light a lot of the scenes.
So, you know, without it, it's fairly innocuous, but you can kind of see the shape of the lamp.
Exactly.
The source.
We had LED emitters with a little wrap of diffusion inside.
Yeah, and that helped a lot to not show too much of the gag. But, you know, the thing to do here is to grab it, soften it, warm it up if need be, to disguise the fact that it's not necessarily the right period. And these had flicker built into it, didn't they?
Yeah, we did. We were running them off of our dimmer board and running them through a randomizer. But every once in a while, it starts to look a little rhythmic.
Yeah, so I think in here we added a bit of a flicker plug-in and just dial it in a little bit to sell it.
And that's, again, something you can localize to a given little window, right?
Yeah, once in this example, that's actually the key to do the color. But yeah, in this example, what I would do is you could just take a mask and, you know, make sure it's not on his face, soften that up. Key could be a little less saturation oriented, it wouldn't be on the skin, but just for the purposes of illustration, you know, it's masking just what you need.
Right.
It's a very strong look there, the cyan and warm. It's very...
Again, fantastic sets.
Yes, he realizes these paintings has somehow shown up in the gallery and...
Yeah. Pickman's influence is making its way into society.
You know, I realize now we went cool here because, you know, not to hit everybody over the head, but it's not a happy moment, and maybe dark and cool is scarier than warm and sunny, so as...
Yeah, I think Mark and I are generally on the same page about a lot of this stuff, which is what's great about working together, is that, you know, we have I think a fairly common or a connected sensibility. Like we, you know, when I'll point something out, Mark will say, "Hey, that's a good idea," and, you know, vice versa. Like we'll bounce back and forth different ideas and things like that. And I think that's a great thing, because I mean, you know, to have someone thinking the same way as you about a given thing is obviously fantastic. But there are also times where, you know, Mark will make suggestions about, you know, how we might be able to isolate something or bring something visually forward that's great. He's seeing it, you know, with a new set of eyes sometimes, whereas, you know, we were in the trenches sort of trying to figure it out on the day. He's now seeing the sort of, you know, what came of that, and he's responding to it. And, you know, that's a fantastic thing to have. And
I'll say this, you know, it's these kind of shows, you know, are great for collaboration. And there's a bunch of it because of the look of the show is very much a part of it. Where not a lot of, some shows it's not. Even though it always matters, it's not necessarily a character. But at the end of the day, this show is Colin's and the director, and I'm just a conduit for them to get what they want. I'll tell that to people. If you know what you want, I'll get it for you. If you don't know what you want, then I'll do it for you, and then we'll talk about if you like it or not. Because sometimes that's the job. Trying to get. We always say, well, where does the negative want to be, or what's the intention, and then did we shoot what was intended, and did they like the people at the end of the chain, whether it's a producer or whoever the filmmakers are. This kind of show, the impression that everyone has, and what seems to have come across working in here, is that he very much let the director and DOPs give the vision, present the vision that they want to present. He let the directors drive this more than anything. So when it came to my part, the early conversations were always myself and the director of photography about what conveying to me his conversations with the director in terms of what their collaborations already set out. And then,
how do you feel in terms of working with the VFX department and Dennis Berardi? You guys had a pretty good communication, and in terms of getting mats and things like that, that's bound to be helpful, right?
Yes, in the beginning we had, all our conversations were about, yes, we're going to get mats for everything, and don't worry, it's all going to be. But when things came down, as it is these days in VFX land, because everything is crazy busy, and the amount of work that they had to turn over, they did all their approvals with the directors without us, without me. And then if there was something specific that we needed to work on, he'd come in and we'd do a little, hey, can you just fix this, or do I have to go back and do it in a new render? He's like, no, we'll just do a window. He's like, great. So then, it's a collaboration with the VFX all the time, on any show. But on something of this scale, very important.
So you's telling me rats is stealing bodies out of coffins? Rats can't do that.
Oh, my dear fellow, they most certainly can.
Oh, God!
Please, show me mercy.
So, Graveyard Rats. This was a really interesting one to do. The plan for this was always to be very monochromatic. And in fact, we photographed it with black and white in mind. We actually, there is a black and white cut of the show. But the color version, again, is very desaturated, and something we wanted to do was sort of be color, but as little color as possible in a funny way. It's the story of a grave robber who, gets his comeuppance, and it's fantastic. It was a really great period look, and the production design again was fantastic. But one of the challenges was, going from that monochromatic beginning to finding this sort of subtle sort of color to it. How did you go about doing that?
Well, I remember, again, Vincenzo was very key in setting the look for this. The black and white version was always going to be, its own thing, and getting it to look more period, we decided, let's add grain to this, because I think on a black and white movie, it just made it look more period. And we kept that for the color version. And knowing that there was going to be a black and white version and a color version, my first instinct was that the color version should be a lot of color, be the yin to the yang of the black and white version. And knowing Guillermo's pedigree of films and how strong they are color-wise, I'm like, oh, let's do this, right? And then Vincenzo came in and was like, no, Mark, I think I want this to be really, subtle and subdued. Long story short, I think where we ended up is way better than what my first instinct was in terms of the strong color, because it really gave it a grittiness. But we still have we have this subtle duotone going on still with mixed lighting throughout this as well. And I think it's almost like a silvery look.
When we lit it, we were sort of working towards a certain color separation with an eye towards, playing with different tonalities in black and white. And it's interesting how, we work with that in this color version as well.
Are key, and that sometimes increases the ratio, but it adds a bit of a different feel, with those two things in play here. Let me do this again this way, so that's a before and after. The other part of this recipe is the grain plugin we're using is on this episode, it's Film Convert Nitrate. And this is something Mike Reagan, who did in a different episode, introduced me to and pushed me to using on a different movie we did together before this series, this film Luma control. So I have the scopes up here. You can see what's happening here with nothing. It's perfectly fine. And you may be able to, just manipulate with HDR controls and log controls how much you're compressing in the low mids here. But the slide is like compressing the mid-tone blacks and bringing up the blacks, much like a film print would do. It just did something nice to the curve of the image that I used as part of the look here. And then the other part, of course, is the grain. So without the whole thing on at all, and maybe, I don't know if you can be able to see it play the grain as much as it is on the SDR version, because the way we're recording this off the screen, but I think it added something nice. We see it in the highlights a lot in this stuff. It has different controls for the highlight grain compared to the, shadow area grain. And we talked a bit about, how much do you put in and still be able to see it? Because with compression streaming
for Netflix and streaming and, versus one day we'll see the light of day on Blu-ray or something like that.
Right.
And it's going to be different effects that are going to work for or against it.
There's one of our animated rats.
Yes.
And again, we're talking about VFX. Great job on these.
Fantastic.
This is one of the times when, we got a good mat for this, because we, needed to be able to manipulate, knowing ahead of time we might have to change the brightness of the rat.
This being monochromatic initially, the lighting of this entire episode was sort of designed for shades of gray. And it gives it kind of a fun, contrasty look. And adding that little tweak of color into a lot of things is interesting as well.
This is a great scene.
And here we used a bit of shading to draw the eye to where he was walking.
Yeah, we had to do a bunch of things here to make sure we were highlighted, just adding, because his head's down, just getting a little hit there. Mm-hmm. But we worked a bunch on the interior of this, something we're calling the split tone look. And you're still doing the mixed color temperature look without having to, add more color on top of it.
Right.
Skating the line of how much color you're putting into the blacks is always a nice way to be able to get that color separation. However, the more black you have in the shot is when you get to dark scenes, then it looks a bit solarized and cartoony if you go too far in that direction. But that's the recipe, if anyone wants to know, in terms of how you make it look interesting without just having an almost black and white image. Right. You're trying to add something there that isn't there.
Subtle bias.
It's exactly, maybe that's the easiest way to explain it. This is so gross. A big story point is he's trying to steal gold teeth and everything, and we had mats made to make sure. We started off just keying, then we did it on some of the shots. We had to key the gold and make everything else less, but in the end we went to VFX with some of that. There's this great shot that I think is one of Vincenzo's finest moments, where you see
we had to spot a few different goldfish bowls to figure out exactly the right magnification
to get this saying it all without saying anything. It's in the
slightly
image.
Grinch-like.
It's great. And then rats in the foreground, fantastic.
But here's another situation where, you know, we used mixed color temperature within the church, and, you know, again, you finding a tiny bit of balance between those using the warmer and the cooler lighting.
Yeah, we're doing a bit of, again, highlight key changes here. But here, you know, I think this background, we want to emphasize this whole, getting the warmth. I think these didn't match or something, so we had to do some work to just emphasize a little bit of the warmth, so that makes the cool and warm dichotomy kind of come out a little bit, right? And then, even though as subtle as it is, just the reflections on his coat, you know,
now it comes from a balloon light up above,
yeah,
which is a different color balance.
And then just punching that highlight a little bit stands it out. And then I think we also have our kind of detail punch there. It really brings out the catch lights in his eyes.
There's one.
Again, that's the same, if we dissect it all down and also take off our film grain, you know, bringing it back in. So that's another great moment. It's like, you know, you could just do it with contrast, but suddenly doing, you know, we're sharpening, but then we're also diffusing highlights and giving it a bit of a kick. It gives it a bit more of a, even though that's a lamp, it's a bit of a moonlight vibe, you know.
Yeah.
And that lets us get those highlights warmer and still keep everything on that, but isn't that, you know, another color. We knew the lamp was right there, so we're just shaping it, get your eyes right to where you want to see, which is the guy's face.
And again, that's, you know, when you're lighting for a couple of cameras at the same time, you know, one thing's going to work better for one angle more than another, and you can balance out the two. We
don't know what's dragging this man's body out there. Again, without getting too much into the story, he doesn't know what's happening yet, but he's got to decide. So I think, yeah, we had to take this down a bunch just to kind of.
Now we were lighting this with the real prop flashlight, which you know, was again controlled and had a certain color balance to it to be efficient as an LED. The flashlight was actually blue,
right?
And the vents that we had built in to light him were orange. And so again, the plan was initially to be able to use those colors to build a bit of contrast in. But here we are in this tunnel, and we lit the sets were literally long pieces of tunnel with little wilding sections. But you know, how are we going to light this? Well, the answer is with the real flashlight. But you know, shaping that and still, you know, making it so we've got dark places,
a lot bluer light, and you know, we grabbed that and, you know, warmed it up, make it a little more period. But yes, you mentioned a long time ago about the development of like the lamp itself, so that it could actually light his face and the tunnel at the same time. It's really,
and that was, you know, that was one of the things that, you know, having done this flashlighty thing before, the one thing you know is the flashlight doesn't come back on the actor's face, so we designed something that would do that. But again, working in these tunnels, I think, you know, some of the things that we had to do was, I think we ended up defocusing the edges a bit too, right? To try and, you know, just some of the sketchier
at times
portions of the cave we would try to de-emphasize.
Once you're down here, you know, you're left with skin tone and then the environment, and that's it. So we're cooling it off a little bit in the environment so that we get the skin tone looks a little more than it actually is when you're doing the desat look. So, and again, in this kind of movie, not afraid to go
Spooko.
this
Spooky
greeny cyan and yes, and fog. Up next, Colin.
Dreams in the Witch House.
Dreams
This
in
is
the Witch House.
Episode 6.
I saw my sister. She was the same age as when she died. And she was trapped.
You never should have come back.
So this is the second one I did.
With Rupert.
With Rupert Grint, the story of a young man who loses his sister at a very early age and then spends the rest of his life trying to get her back and ends up, making some serious mistakes along the way that will come back to haunt him.
Again, we got our strong mixed lighting.
Yeah. And, there was...
Warm, cool.
Yeah, we want there again. This is finding a type of moonlight color and different colors that we'd use in the palette, and wanting to, sort of lean into the fantastical of it a little bit.
Yes, it's a sky replace done on this to make it a little more
stormy,
because that's what's happening.
Challenge with this early scene was we decided early on, even though it was supposed to be a dark and stormy night, that maybe it would be a little different to do it, during the day, and that would actually allow for a lighting change to happen when the magic arrives.
Some of the things we need to do here is we emphasize some of the lightning and whatnot, right?
Right.
Just
we had
harder.
polarizers in the camera that we actually rotated in shot. To help change, the reflections on surfaces and things. And then we also were using lights through the windows. We shot this day for day, but we actually, through a combination of changing the camera exposure and doing a lighting crossfade, we tried to sort of give the idea that the clouds had rolled in and everything was getting dark outside. And then I think, again, when we come here, you and I would figure out a way to sort of augment all that and smooth it out.
So yeah, starting off, good image to start with, then bringing it into the world to get a little more tone, a little more interesting. This is when the starts changing with the storm here, isn't it? So, I thought one of the more interesting parts of this was the whole other world, other dimension. I don't even know what's in the script. What was it? Was it ever labeled as anything in terms of where?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those situations where the concept art was fantastic. Because the art department came up with this idea early on about how this sort of forest would exist that he would travel to, and it's in the script that it changes its state. When they first visit this place from being, like a sort of happy, perhaps welcoming place to a much darker environment. And so we did that using a combination of LED lighting and having a couple different looks on set on the day, and then taking it that one step further with you afterwards. This is when the character is getting pulled in. He didn't realize what he was in for. And he's being pulled into this otherworldly place. And this is a combination of a real set with a backdrop and a bit of VFX augmentation.
And yeah, the challenge, when we're in tight, we can kind of hide the forest with shallow depth of field, but this big opening and the odd time when you get into a wide shot, the VFX had obviously put in a lot of this, and I think they did a great job. On the times when in the shots, I'm still doing this trying to glow the highlights a bit to get our kind of softness back after. It gives it a way to manage contrast without really having to add any contrast with lift cam again. The times when we're in tight, there wasn't much need for it, but in shots that had, you know, a wider frame, we're taking the outside of the image with a little window and doing a bit of a swing tilt effect to try and it just makes it a little, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to make sense photographically. It was just something, it's already a weird
place, right?
And, you know, let's go for it. And
it helps draw the eye, and it helps, you know, confuse things a little bit.
Yes. So, you know, we didn't go crazy dark or...
I think part of it was wanting to have somewhere to go, right? And that was the thing.
Yes,
like,
and we're not sure it's still a happy place. He's seeing his sister for the first time over these years.
And narratively, we think he's found his solution.
Yes.
I think this is like, everything is going according to plan.
Yes. Has a really interesting texture, I think.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, so that's it.